Hi, this is going to be a video of how to do an on-point quilt. It'll include cutting the triangles needed. You need side triangles and end triangles, how to piece it together, and just a few other tips. So let's get started. I will go through from beginning to end to getting to where you see this pieced table runner right here. Here are the blocks that I'm going to be using. I'm doing a small one as an example, but you can use this example that I'm doing to do a larger quilt with many more blocks. So I have 6 blocks here that are pieced, and then 2 center blocks that are just plain blocks. And these blocks are 8 inches. So what you're going to need to do to make this quilt on point is you need what is called setting triangles. You're going to need triangles here and here, sides, and then you're going to need end triangles here. So I called all of those setting triangles, side triangles and end triangles. So you can see there are 6 side triangles, the 2 on the top and the bottom and 2 on each side, and then there's going to be 4 end triangles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first how to do the formula, and then I'm going to show you how I cut them. And then I'm going to show you how I sew this together. So let's go over to the cutting table and I'll show you my formula. And I will also post the formula at the end of this video. That way you will get a really good look at it, and you can pause the video and copy down the formula. So let's go over to the cutting. Okay, so here we are at the cutting table. I've already cut my squares that I need to do the on-point setting triangles, but I'm going to show you the formula that I used. And like I said earlier, I'm going to post those formulas at the end of the video so you can copy down how to do it. So my blocks over there were 8 inches, and you want to start with the finished size. So since 8 inches includes the seam allowance, the finished size of those blocks is actually 7.5 inches, because you have a 1/4 inch off around all 4 sides. So I'm just going to show you how I did my formula. So I have 7.5 inches multiplied by 1.4142, and that equals 10.61 inches. And you're always going to want to round up to the nearest eighth. So 10.61 is just below 10 5/8 inches. So then I use 10 5/8 inches plus 1 1/4 inches, and that equals the size of the block I need, which is 11 7/8 inches. So that's my big block. This one is going to give me the side triangles. You cut these bigger blocks both ways diagonally, and that'll give you 4 triangles per square. Now this one that I'm working with only needs 6 triangles, so I'm going to have 2 left over. Most of the time you end up with a multiple of 4 on a quilt, and so you have an even number of blocks and you don't waste any fabric. But for this one, I just need 6 of those side triangles. So then for your smaller one, which makes the end, the square is always going to be smaller because the end caps are smaller. So I started with my 7.5 inches finished, and then you divide it. Instead of multiplying it by the 1.4142, you divide it by that same number, and I came to 5.3 inches, which is just below 5 3/8 when I go ahead and go up to the next 1/8 inch. And then I do 5/8 of an inch plus 7/8 equals 6 1/4. So then this block is 6 1/4. And now for the end triangle blocks, you only cut them once diagonally, and then that creates your end caps. So, and you're usually going to have 4 end caps on any quilt you're doing. So you're usually only going to need 2 of this smaller block. And like I said, I'm going to post this formula. I mean, I know you can't really see it well on the paper that I wrote it on, but I'll post the formula at the end of this video so you'll be able to see it. So first we're going to cut this one apart, and I'm going to very carefully line up my ruler with the ends of this. And I'm going to cut. And so now I have, as I cut the two blocks together, I have 4 end triangles. And you can cut the squares separately if you want. I've got them nice and lined up because I cut them together. So that way I could cut 2 at a time. Next comes the bigger block. This one's a little bit more challenging because it's longer. So I'm going to use my longer ruler. And hopefully I have some nice grips on the back of this ruler, so hopefully it stays nice and straight as I'm cutting. Okay, so now that's the one side. But now you're going to need to cut these triangles in half this way so that you get your 4 side triangles per block. So I'm going to line it up again. Sometimes on my cutting board I kind of like to line the point of the triangle up with a line on my cutting board, because then that kind of helps me make sure I'm getting right on that top. And I'm going to use my shorter ruler and make sure I'm nice and even. So now I got 4 side triangles here, and then I will cut the other 2. And lining it up. Get our ruler down here. And cut these 2. So now, like I said before, I have 8 side triangles, but I'm only going to need 6. So let's go over to the design wall, and I'll show you how I go ahead and put these in to show you how we sew one of these together. Okay, here we are at the design wall. There's my blocks, and now I'm going to start placing the side triangles and end triangles on there. So I'm going to start with the end triangles. And you'll notice how the points of the triangles overlap the blocks, which is fine because those will get cut off at the end after you are done stitching it all together. And it also helps guiding your seams. Okay, so those are the end blocks. Now I'm going to put in the side ones. And you can see now how it's already turning into a nice rectangle here, instead of a kind of a strange looking setup for your blocks. Just place these last 2 on the side. And there you go. So now we have the blocks and the setting triangles. Now I'll show you, I'm going to separate these out to show you how you stitch them together. This is what I call the end cap. You're going to stitch these 2 side triangles to this block first, and then use the block as a guide to put this straight down in the center. And then you're going to stitch this row diagonal. I'm going to separate this down here. So then this row, this is another end. And then this row here is going to be stitched together diagonally. So besides having setting triangles, the other difference between, this one's a little bit crooked from the other one, so I'll just kind of straighten it up. The big difference between a regular quilt and an on point besides the side triangles is that you put it together on the diagonal. So I'm going to start sewing this one, the end cap. I'm going to sew together the 2 sides, and then I'm going to show you how you line up that top end cap so it's in the center. Now when you sew this together, you're going to make sure as you flip this over that these two 90-degree angles are lined up. And as you can see, the point of the triangle is going to extend about 1/4 of an inch at the edge of the block, but that's okay. So I'll show you what it looks like when I get these two on, and then I'll show you how I put that one on. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine and do that. As you can see, I've got the two side triangles on this one end cap block, and I am going to press the seams. And if you followed me before, you know I like to press seams open. I'm kind of weird like that. So I just open it with my hand and then press down. So once I get the seam open and pressed, here's what it looks like on this side. And you can see once again the triangles here. You can see the points sticking out, and that's okay. So now I get the end cap, and I want to get that so it's right on the center. So I'm going to use my ruler to do that, to make sure that I have it nice and centered there. So I put my ruler here, and you can see, luckily, that it's 7.5 inches, kind of like it's supposed to be. And so I'm going to kind of find the center, which would be about 3 3/4. So I'm going to put this further down here and just line this end up. And then you find where your point is on the ruler. So kind of got 3 3/4 there. And you can see how these ends kind of point, they kind of overlap there too. Once you get this sewn on, you can clip off those ends, but I usually don't do it ahead of time. So I'm going to pin this in place and go stitch it on. And now you definitely want this in the center so that your quilt top is not wonky when you get done putting it all together. Always pin. So now that I got it pinned, I'm going to go sew it, and then I'll bring it back and sew that on. And you can actually see, I will hold it up closer, that since I had these squares cut perfectly, when I put my 1/4 inch seam in there, you probably can't see it too well because I used a gray thread that kind of blends in, but that's where my seam started, and it's right where the tip of this triangle crossed the side triangle. And that shows you that you had cut your squares and your triangles the correct size, and so that the formula worked well. So now I'm going to just press this open, and I'll put this back up on the wall. So this is what the end cap of the quilt looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this back up the wall, and I'm going to sew the other diagonal rows, and then I will show you what it looks like once I have the diagonal rows all put together. One more quick thing before I finish the rows. You have those two end caps, but you're also going to have two longer rows, like this one, that's going to have an end cap at one of the ends, because you obviously have 4 end caps on the quilt. So you're going to do the same thing that you did on the end caps as you did with the smaller triangle, side triangle. You're going to line it up, and you're going to use your ruler to center it. Now, of course, this one doesn't have the seam allowances sewn into any other row yet. So this one measures 8 inches. So I want the point of my triangle to point right at the 4-inch mark on my ruler. And when I do that, then I know that this triangle is nice and centered. So now I can pin it in place for stitching so that this end cap will be stitched the right way on this quilt, on this side of the quilt. So I'm going to continue putting the rows together and then I'll show you how it looks. Okay, as you can see, all the rows are put together diagonally. And this is what your quilt will look like on the design wall or your large floor space when you get done piecing the rows together diagonally. Now I'm going to come up close here and show you that now when you want to put the rows together, you are going to make sure you match up the seams of the pieced blocks and the straight blocks like this, because this is going to make sure your quilt goes together nice and smoothly. And then of course you're going to have a little overlap here on the end with the point again. And if you have your blocks, your side triangles cut well, once again, your 1/4 inch seam is going to go right across the center of where the two of them crisscross. But it's very important to get your seams aligned so that your quilt looks good once it's put together. So I'm going to put it together now and show you how it looks. If you're interested in my tutorial on aligning seams, I do have one here on my channel. Just go ahead and look at the list of my videos, and I have one on aligning seams. Here we are with the end. It's all put together, and I think I did a pretty good job matching up the points of the blocks. They look pretty even. I'll get a little closer here. See how I matched them up. So I'm quite happy with that. That is one point that I like. And then the other point is you want to make sure that on the outside you have at least 1/4 inch from the edge to the point of your outer blocks, so that when you put a binding on, or if you're deciding to add a border, you don't cut off the outer edges of your blocks. So the points to remember for an on-point quilt is it's going to be pieced together diagonally, unlike a regular quilt. You're going to need to use the finished size of your block to cut your side and end triangles to figure the calculations for those, because your if you use the unfinished size, your triangles will be too big. I think those are the really, and then I'll also line up when you're sewing your triangles in the rows. You want to line up your 90-degree angles with your blocks first, and then you're going to have a little bit of overlap with the little, I call them tails. See, and now I can cut those off because I'm all done. Finally, I would say if you're planning on doing an on-point quilt, start with something like this, a smaller project with just a few blocks, even only 4 blocks, because that way you can get familiar with doing an on-point quilt. If you start out with a very large quilt, you could end up getting pretty frustrated if it's the first on-point quilt that you have done. So that's it. I'm going to put the formulas at the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, and have a good day. Okay, now it's time for me to share the formulas with you. This is for the side triangles. This is the block that's going to be the bigger one that you're going to cut into 4 pieces. And here is the formula here. This is just an example using a block in here, but this is where you're going to put, where this 6 inches is where you're going to put your finished block size without the seam allowances. You're going to multiply it by 1.4142. This one happens to work out where it equals 8.5 inches, so you're not going to have to do any rounding up. But I've written down here, always round up the number you get, this number, to the closest 1/8 measurement. It's already there, so we don't have to round this one up. But if you get one, like right here, I put an example, if you get a number like 9.18, you would round it up to the nearest 1/8 inch, which would be 9.25 or 9.25 inches, because this 9.18 is over 1/8. So it's above 9 1/8. So it's between 9 1/8 and 9 1/4. So you want to go up to 9 1/4. So that is that number. Then you take that 8 1/2 and you add 1 1/4 inches. So then as you add those together, you get 9 3/4 inches. So you're going to cut your block or your square 9 3/4 inches square, and you're going to cut it in 4 pieces. So my example here, if you need 8 side triangles, you would have to cut 2 squares. So however many side triangles you need, that's how many squares you have to cut. Sometimes, like in the example I showed, I only needed 6 side triangles, so I did have 2 left over. Most of the times, if you're doing a larger quilt, it'll come out to a division of 4, so you'll get to use everything that you cut from that. So that is your side triangles. Now we're going to go to the end triangles. This is going to be the smaller block because it is going to, or the smaller square, because these go on the end of your quilt. And you're always going to cut 2 of them because you cut it diagonally. And so then each square will make 2 end pieces, end triangles. And you always need 4 end triangles on your quilt. So we use the same formula except a couple of numbers. So here's your finished size of your block. This time it's divided by 1.4142. So it's the same number, but you're dividing instead of multiplying. This one came out again to a nice even 4 1/4. But if it didn't, you would round up to your nearest eighth inch. So then you take that 4 1/4 inches and you add 7/8 of an inches to it, and you get 5 1/8 inches. And so that's the size of the blocks that you will need to cut. So those are the 2 formulas. Hopefully this gave you enough good information. And if you still have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.